on this panel, and afterwards we will entertain questions. So don't leave, because there will be questions. Those of you who have questions, is Michael Braun, who is the Assistant Administrator and Chief Operations of the Drug Enforcement Administration. He's going to be talking about the nexus between drugs and terrorist organizations. And as DEA Chief of Operations, Special Agent Michael Braun is responsible for leading the worldwide drug enforcement operations of the agency across the United States and 58 countries. He was appointed to his position in February 2005 and is a principal advisor to the DEA Administrator on all enforcement-related matters. Prior to his appointment, Mr. Braun served as Acting Administrator for Intelligence. In December 2003, Mr. Braun was selected as Deputy Assistant Administrator for Intelligence to lead the Multi-Agency Office of Special Intelligence. He was also appointed by Deputy Attorney General James Comey as the Interim Director of the new Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force Intelligence Fusion Center, a multi-agency national drug intelligence center that supports the national drug strategy and our nation's war on terrorism. He has an illustrious career throughout the DEA. In 2001, he was appointed to be Senior Executive Service and assigned as Special Agent in charge of the Detroit Division. He had oversight responsibility for 425 personnel assigned to 15 DEA offices in Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky. In June 2003, shortly after President Bush declared an end to major hostilities in Iraq, Mr. Braun was detailed to the Department of Defense for 90 days to serve on special assignment in Iraq as the Chief of Staff for the Interim Ministry of the Interior Coalition Provisional Authority. Mr. Braun assisted in creating the new Iraqi National Police Service and Customs and Borders agencies, and with rebuilding the Iraqi security infrastructure. Mr. Braun enlisted in the United States Marine Corps after high school and served from 1971 to 1973 as an infantryman, including service in Vietnam. He received a B.S. degree in criminal justice in 1977 from Southeast Missouri State University, and he has attended a number of military, government, and private leadership courses, including the Senior Manager in Government program at Harvard University. He is married and has 3 children. Mr. Braun, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm not going to turn this thing into a TV talk show, but I cannot. If there's one thing I can't do is stand behind a podium for any length of time. The real reason, though, is those 2 vents right up there, they're blowing right over the top of every one of these gentlemen, and I'm telling you what, it is extremely hot up there, much cooler down here. What I'm going to talk about today is we've taken really about an hour-and-a-half presentation, cut it down to about 25 minutes to talk about the nexus between drugs and terrorism. And then I was told that we have 18 minutes. So fasten your seatbelts. I'm going to blow through this thing as quickly as I can. It's a presentation that is focused on really this nexus at a 30,000-foot level. I'm not drilling deep. I'm not going to get into specifics with respect to cases and what we're doing and that kind of thing. It's just a broad overview. First slide. My able assistant, Tony Carter, by the way, is our country attaché in Cyprus, and he's up for promotion. Good luck, Tony. Don't screw this up. We also have Tom Sinecal, our assistant regional director from Ankara, that's in the audience as well. This is a topic that DEA has talked about for many years. We've testified before our Congress on many, many occasions. In fact, I recently tasked our Congressional and Public Affairs to go back in time to try to determine when we first started talking, when administrators, chiefs of operations, and others in our agency testified before Congress about this connection between drugs and terrorism, or drugs funding insurgencies and that kind of thing. We can take it all the way back to 1985, and then everything beyond that's in the archives. If you work for any kind of a federal bureaucracy, you know what that means. I'm not even going down that road. So we can take it back to at least 1985. It's nothing new. Other thing that I want you to know about or understand is I'm not just talking about Western Hemisphere terrorist organizations like the FARC, the AUC, the ELN, Sendero Luminoso in Peru. I'm also talking about Hamas, Hezbollah. It says, and possibly Al-Qaeda. No, I'm going to talk about Al-Qaeda in this presentation. Next. Our State Department and our Department of Defense have identified 42 foreign terrorist organizations that pose a threat to the United States of America and other freedom-loving countries around the world. DEA, and this was not a unilateral study. We had input from our intelligence community, our services, also the Department of Defense from our DIA and others. The long and the short of it is DEA and the interagency community has linked 18, roughly half, of those 42 foreign terrorist organizations as being involved in some aspect of the global drug trade. I'll get deeper into that in just a minute. And there they are. Next slide. Why drugs? Three things are happening and have happened really post 9/11. Actually, you could take it back further than that, but let's just talk about this for a minute. State sponsorship is declining. State sponsorship for terrorism is declining in a very big way. Very private and powerful private donors, our FBI, CIA, and Treasury, as well as the Israeli intelligence services and others around the globe, have done tremendous work at significantly disrupting that flow of money. So that's happening as well. A third thing is happening, especially when you're talking about groups like Al-Qaeda. You're moving from a corporate kind of a organizational structure to a franchise structure. What do I mean by that? I'll tell you what. I'll tell you in just a minute, a couple bullets down. There are a lot of ways that terrorist organizations can make money on the side to fund their operations after those three things or those three dynamics on top are taking place. They can rob banks. They can kidnap for ransom. They can engage in identity theft, which they do. They can engage in knockoff designer clothes, which some do. There's a lot of ways to make money. Folks, I'm going to tell you in just a minute why so many are turning to drugs, because there is no illicit commodity out there that generates the kind of money that the global drug trade generates. The cost of an actual terrorist attack is moderate. If you look at the Madrid train bombings, it only cost about $70,000 to pull that terrorist attack off. And this is where that franchise model kind of blends in. Our Spanish colleagues from law enforcement and their intelligence services, folks that I work with closely, have told me that that was an Al-Qaeda franchise cell that pulled that off. They subscribe to the ideology of OBL and Al-Qaeda, but we have put so much pressure on Al-Qaeda post 9/11 that their organizational structure has gone from a corporate model to a franchise model. They've gotten, and quite honestly, it becomes very, very complicated because you've now got cells around the globe. They're left up to their own devices to get the job done. That $70,000 that they needed, that franchise cell or splinter cell needed to pull off that attack, was made almost exclusively through the sale of ecstasy, MDMA, and hashish. That's how they funded that operation. But terrorist organizations need a lot of money, for the care and feeding of their terrorist organization. You think about it. They've got to recruit, they've got to train, they've got to arm. They've got to move their operatives around the globe in a clandestine manner. They have to set up safe houses. All of that costs a great deal of money. Lots of other stuff in there, too. They have to pay gatekeepers around the world to move operators or operatives across borders. They have to pay for counterfeit documents, passports, that kind of thing. All that takes a lot of money. So although a terrorist attack doesn't cost a great deal of money, terror nurturing and feeding of your terrorist organization does. Next slide. Massive profit potential here. The UN estimates that the global drug trade generates about $322 billion in revenue each year. The UN also estimates, if you look at just the US, Canada, and Mexico, that flow, $147 billion a year. Hopefully I said billion, 322 billion at the top. Our Office of National Drug Control Policy, our drug czar and his office estimate that our citizens in the United States alone spend about $65 billion a year trying to satisfy their insatiable appetite for illicit drugs. There's a lot of ways to make money in the global drug trade. And I'm going to use the FARC, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, as an example. They've been around for 40 years, folks. About 15 years ago, when their state sponsors fell off, they're in Colombia. They're not stupid. It didn't take them long to understand that they needed to do something to keep their terrorist organization functioning. They were in the heart of the global cocaine production. They started taxing farmers. Then they started providing security at clandestine airstrips and laboratories to the Colombian drug cartels. Then they started moving into providing transportation of the cocaine. Flash forward to today, folks. In just 15 years, they are involved in every aspect of cocaine production and transportation in Colombia. So much so that 9 out of every 10 grams of cocaine in the United States is touched at some point during the production and transportation cycles by the FARC in Colombia. The best estimates are they're making somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion a year in this activity, okay? And that's more than enough to fund their operations. Our National Security Council recently tasked DEA with conducting a study comparing the Taliban of today with the FARC of today. And what we found, folks, is the Taliban of today is where the FARC was at 15 years ago. So if you apply a little predictive intelligence, okay, I believe that in the not too distant future, the Taliban is going to be involved in a far bigger way in the heroin and opium and poppy industry in Afghanistan. Right now they're taxing farmers, which is a form of extortion. They're taxing farmers, and there are some indications that they're now moving into providing security for cache sites, for labs, and that kind of thing. Just what happened to the FARC, folks, 15 years ago. Next slide. This is disturbing. If you look at the tri-border area of South America, that no man's land where Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil come together. Big time breeding ground for potential or for the recruitment of terrorists. There is a large Arabic population down there, a lot of males between the ages of 16 to 25 years of age feel very disenfranchised. It's a terrorist recruiter's dream. But you can buy on the high side. We're being conservative here. In that tri-border area, you can buy a kilogram of cocaine for $5,000. You can move that same kilogram into this part of the world, and that same kilogram is going to sell for $75,000. That's before you break it up, folks. So you can take 14 kilograms, this is not an earth-shattering amount of cocaine, folks. You can take 14 kilos, put it into a normal-sized suitcase, put it on your checked luggage or checked baggage onto an airliner, and move it over here, and you've got $1 million in profit in that suitcase. Okay? I can't go into specifics. Suffice it to say, we know what's happening. Okay? We know what's happening on a regular basis. Next. The commonalities: foreign terrorist organizations versus global drug trafficking organizations. You've heard a lot said about asymmetrical threats, asymmetrical warfare. So what does the enemy look like that's involved in asymmetrical warfare? How do they act? Left side of the screen. They're opposed to any nation-state sovereignty, total disregard for human rights. They have to operate in a clandestine environment. Seldom do they wear uniforms. Most often, well, not most often, but many times, they're not tied to a nation-state. They rely heavily on the hallmarks of organized crime, ladies and gentlemen. Both of these things do. Both of these threats do. If they can't corrupt you, they'll intimidate you. And if they can't intimidate you, they'll resort to violence. Sophisticated organizational structures. both global drug trafficking organizations, foreign terrorist organizations, have highly compartmentalized organizational structures. If you take down 2 or 3 cells, you really don't have much of an impact on the greater organization. They're designed that way, as most of you know. Most operatives in a given cell don't know very much about other cells, and they don't know much about the greater organization, quite honestly. And it's designed that way to thwart law enforcement, intelligence agencies, and our military. They both rely on the same shadow facilitators, and we'll talk about that more in just a minute. They rely heavily on the latest in technology to shoot, move, and communicate. The BlackBerries, the internet, encrypted sat phones, cell phones. These knuckleheads will go into a store and purchase, both of these threats will purchase 50 prepaid calling cards or 50 prepaid cell phones. And it becomes a nightmare for those of us that are going after these threats. They seek to operate in ungoverned space. And you'll see that clearly in just a minute. They need large amounts of money. This is very important. They have the ability to quickly regenerate. After you knock down 2 or 3 of those cells, 3 months later, what you're facing doesn't look like, smell like, or act like what you were trying to break up just 3 months earlier. The differences, the main difference, really, I won't say the only difference, the main difference is foreign terrorist organizations are motivated by ideology. Drug trafficking organizations always have been and always will be motivated by money and greed. But then you have an interesting dynamic here. You've got the FARC that I mentioned earlier. And I refer to the FARC as a hybrid, okay? 1 part terrorist organization, 1 part global drug trafficking organization. I think, quite honestly, what you're looking at right there is the face of 21st century organized crime. And it's meaner and uglier than anything we've ever faced before. Next. This is still a bit of a work in progress, but we plotted the 42 foreign terrorist organizations around the globe. That's where they're based. Okay? Remember what I just said about ungoverned space. They thrive in ungoverned space. Add the next, punch the button one more time. Add the drug and precursor chemical source countries one more time. And then the transportation routes for drug money, precursors, and, drugs, precursor chemicals, and money. We weren't shocked, folks. It's the same place. Same places. Okay? Foreign terrorist organizations, drug trafficking organizations operate in the same ungoverned space. They seek it out. Earlier this week, what day is this? Sunday. Earlier this week, I think it was about Monday or Tuesday, when I was back in D.C. at my daily 8:30 command brief. I've got all my section chiefs in our command center, and they're telling me what's happened with our offices and our counterparts around the globe. In Guinea-Bissau, the African continent. I think 2 of the speakers were talking about this last night. 2 FARC members from Colombia arrested in Guinea-Bissau. Both were known to us and our Colombian National Police counterparts for their involvement in not only narcotics, the narcotics industry, but also in terrorist activity. In fact, one of them was wanted for killing a Colombian National Army undercover intelligence officer about 4 years earlier. The female police chief was trying desperately to hang on to these knuckleheads and keep them in jail. Ungoverned space. Ordered by a corrupt magistrate judge to release them. They're now in the wind. They were captured, ladies and gentlemen, with drugs, massive amounts of ammunition, small arms, RPGs, you name it. Okay? It's all coming together here, folks. Ungoverned space. Next. This just happens to be DEA's force laydown globally. This is where we're at, located overseas. DEA has the largest U.S. law enforcement presence abroad. We've got roughly about 15% of our workforce now in 92 countries. This slide's a little bit dated, 92 offices in 65 countries. Next slide. But the point being is go back for 1 second, Tony. Hopefully I don't screw you up here. I'll take the hit on this. We're in the same place. This just makes us feel good. Because if you remember that earlier slide with all the drug flows and everything, we're in the same places. That's a good thing. Next slide. Told us we did something right. Shoot all the way to the bottom here very quickly. Our Congress has blessed our organization with some very, very powerful extraterritorial jurisdictions. We now have the Counter-Terrorism law, 21 U.S.C. 960A, that basically says if you're a terrorist or you're supporting a terrorist organization and you or it are involved in any aspect of the drug trade, whether any of those drugs were destined for the United States or not, we have jurisdiction. Folks, we've got very, very robust sentencing laws in our country with respect to Title 21. If we can get you back to the United States and convict you in federal court, and we've got about a 95% plus conviction rate, you're locked up basically for the duration. Many, many, many in our Department of Defense, as they're going down this counterinsurgency road, are beginning to understand clearly that we swing a pretty heavy bat. And consequently, I've personally briefed more 3- and 4-star generals and admirals in the last 18 months than our organization has in the last 30-plus years. I've briefed 4 4-stars in just the past month, all wanting this presentation on the nexus between drugs and terrorism. They're starting to get it. Wes Clark definitely gets it. I wish he was back in uniform. Next slide. One last thing. You saw financial investigations on that previous slide. This is very important, folks, and it's not rocket science. Following the money. We, with our administrator, Karen Tandy, about 4 years ago, quite honestly, she shamed us and said, you folks do a great job following the dope, okay, and taking it as far as you can, getting people to cooperate, and ultimately leading to large seizures of dope, tons and multi-tons of drugs, and the arrest of some very bad folks. Why aren't you doing the same thing in reverse order? Why aren't you just following the money the same way? I'm not trying to turn you into IRS, CID investigators involved in long-term complex net worth investigations. That's not what I'm doing. But every investigation, as of 4 years ago, now has a financial aspect. We are interviewing every single informant that we've got, folks, and we've got 10,000 of them around the globe, about how does the money flow. And consequently, in just 3 short years, we've gone from kind of a stagnant position of seizing somewhere between $400 million to $500 million a year in cash and assets to right now, for this fiscal year, we're tracking just under $3 billion. Okay? It's working great. And if you follow the money, you will get off of that one-way street. If you're following the money, it'll take you to the drugs, it'll take you to the terrorists, it'll take you to the shadow facilitators. Okay? It'll take you in many different directions. But if you're just following the guns, or if you're just following the drugs, that's the direction you're going in. And you're not going to get off that single or that one-way street. You're not going to get onto the superhighway. Next slide. How am I doing? I'm almost done. Almost done. Very important, folks. Back in D.C. and other parts of the world, a lot of people see this threat still as it's depicted on the top. No real connection, kind of separate, yada, yada. Okay? We obviously see things differently. We see it as it's depicted on the bottom. There's a clear, unequivocal connection between drugs and terrorist organizations. But I don't care how you look at it. If you add the third dimension, folks, the gray area, hit it one more time, Tony. The shadow facilitators, folks, okay? something else that'll take you in multiple directions. Both of these threats rely on the same shadow facilitators. The Al-Qaeda moves operatives around the Makran Strait. They haven't established their own smuggling infrastructure. That smuggling infrastructure on the maritime smuggling infrastructure, folks, most of you know, it's been around for generations, run by the same families, the same boat captains, and their fathers and grandfathers before them. That's what they've got to rely on. If they try to set it up themselves, they're going to get their throats cut. The same holds true for our southwest border in the United States. We've got 32 identified gatekeepers along that southwest border, each responsible for their own lane. The Al-Qaeda is not going to send operatives into Mexico to set up a separate, independent smuggling infrastructure to move their operatives across the border. They'll get their throats cut. It's a vicious world. The point being is you cannot, or put it this way, you have to apply, I believe, as much focus on that gray area as you do either one of those primary threats if you're going to be successful. What concerns me is there's not enough of that going on, quite honestly, not the way I see it. Next slide. Or the forecast, very quickly. Traditional drug trafficking organizations are going to maintain control of the trade for the years to come. But there is this evolution of both drug trafficking organizations and foreign terrorist organizations, and they are gravitating folks closer together and closer together at speeds that most, honestly, most don't want to admit. Speeds far faster than most want to admit. They're coming together. I see it every single day. Others are seeing it as well. Next slide. The final forecast. There are going to be more hybrids. Okay? There are going to be more FARCs. The Taliban's headed down that road. They're out of the chute. They're heading in that direction already. And we're going to see more of that. And it is, I believe, one man's opinion, after 33 years in this business, okay, it's the face of 21st century organized crime. General Wes Clark hit it right on the head last night. These people do not deserve lawyer status, folks. They don't. They are criminals. They are international thugs. That's what they are. And they need to be treated as such. One more time. It's a big dilemma right now. As Professor Banks was talking about earlier, one of the big dilemmas in Washington, D.C. When does a drug trafficker become a terrorist? I've had meeting after meeting over in the Pentagon, and they've come over to DEA. We're just separated only by the I-395. I can see the place. They're over in our place or we're over in theirs, and we're debating this on a regular basis. And this is, again, let's not make this complicated. If a terrorist is a terrorist, it makes no damn difference if he or she happens to be a drug trafficker too. Okay? That doesn't mean that if a terrorist happens to be involved in drug trafficking, you can't kill him. Okay? You can't. Provided they are, I don't know if I have the terminology correct, but in a declared war, in a declared armed conflict. There you go. Okay? If they are in a declared armed conflict. In Afghanistan, target. Put a big target on it. Okay? But is it a law enforcement, or is it a military, or is it an intelligence community? Who's responsible? Folks, we're all responsible, and we've all got to work closer together. Next one, and that's it. I'm done. You can read that one. Okay? Thank you.